By the time of the 41st millennium, the warriors of the 12th Legion are little more than frothing, blood-drunk barbarians, butchers and madmen set loose upon the galaxy to spill the blood of thousands of worlds, driven to wanton slaughter by the brutal nails buried deep inside their brains, replicas of a piece of archaeotech as ancient as it is cruel. The nails heighten aggression to ludicrous proportions by dampening all emotions other than anger and rage, inducing an agonizing pain throughout the victim's body whenever they don't find themselves in combat. The act of murder offering only momentary relief from the nails' crippling pain. But by all accounts, the 12th wasn't always like this. The World Eaters, originally known as the Warhounds, were a noble and proud legion with a strong code of honor. But with the introduction of the Butcher's Nails, the Legion would throw itself into the throngs of madness. Nobility, honor, restraint, hesitation, tactics, all were but a sheath around their blades, a weakness that hindered their ultimate goal of conquering the galaxy. And the World Eaters had little tolerance for weakness. The story of the Butcher's Nails is examined in great detail in Angron's Primarch novel, Slave of New Syria. And that's the novel that today's story comes from. Now, after 10,000 years of being subjected to the Nails' madness, few World Eaters even hold a sliver of their original sanity, and most walk the path of Kharne, spilling blood and taking skulls in the Blood God's name. Don't get me wrong, even before the Nails, the World Eaters were a pretty brutal legion, one that served as the Emperor's conquerors. When they were deployed, they would burn a world to the ground in order for it to be rebuilt in the Emperor's image. They took no prisoners and left none alive. They were destruction incarnate, but destruction was a necessity in the Emperor's plans. They were the legion that was willing to do what the others could not or would not. But even amongst such ruthless men, there was honor. They had codes and laws that they followed, and valued the lives of their brothers above all else. And although retreat is not something that the World Eaters are known for, a tactical regrouping was certainly a tactic that they would utilize instead of just letting their men get slaughtered. But that all changed when Angron was reunited with them. Under his leadership, the Legion would be changed forever. But before we dive a bit deeper, I want to give a quick shout out to this video's sponsor.
For the longest time, I was the type of guy who really didn't think much about taking care of my skin. After I started doing YouTube full time, I frequently found myself staying up all night, staring at like 15 open PDFs on my computer screen to do research for my lore videos. It's a fun job, but it often leaves me looking pretty tired. And the dark rings under the eyes? Nope, not a fan of that. Well, thankfully the sponsor of this video, Geologie, hooked me up with a line of their skincare products that have been making a world of difference. Geologie is a 15-time award-winning men's skincare company that doesn't use any fancy marketing nonsense in their products. They only use simple ingredients that have been used and trusted by dermatologists for years. Ingredients that actually make a difference. Now here's how it works. First, you click the link down in the description of this video, or go to geologie.com. There you'll take a 30-second diagnostic quiz. It'll ask you questions about your skin and what your goals are. Then their team of dermatologists will design a trial set just for you. And fellas, people will notice the results. You'll start getting a lot more compliments in your day-to-day life. Their 30-day trial kit comes with 4 different products. 2 bottles of their everyday face wash, their vital morning face cream, repairing night cream, and nourishing eye cream. And it's all shipped directly to your door. If you like the results after the first 30 days, you can continue on with their 90-day supplies, or just order the products as you need them a la carte. It's whatever works best for you and your routine. Right now, for a limited time, they're offering my viewers a pretty crazy deal. If you use my code HAMMER50, you'll get an additional 50% off their award-winning skincare trial set. And that discount stacks on top of their current sale prices. On top of that, they have a bonus offer on one of their brand new skin, hair, and body products of your choice when you add it to your trial. So head to geologie.com. That's geologie.com. Supplies are limited though, so get yours while you can. Thanks to Geologie for sponsoring this video. And with that out of the way, let's get back into the grimdark.
Rare amongst the Primarchs, Angron viewed his sons with nothing but contempt. He hated them and resented the fact that the Emperor had forced him to lead them. We're gonna go over Angron in a lot more depth in a future deep dive, as he's a much more fascinating and tragic character than people give him credit for. But I'm gonna give a quick overview of his background, so if you're brand new and don't know anything about the World Eaters, you can still follow along with this video. You see, Angron was a slave. He was forced to be a gladiator, and the Butcher's Nails had been implemented into his brain by the masters of the world he grew up on. They made him go absolutely insane, causing him to murder his adopted father figure in the gladiator pits. Now, eventually he would lead a revolution against the slave masters. In the hour of their final battle, the enemy numbers were too great, and all of them knew that they were going to die. But they would do so together, as brothers and sisters. Angron and his fellow gladiators would die free. But Angron wasn't fated to die here this day, as the Emperor of Mankind had used a teleporter to snatch him away, leaving the free men of Nuceria to their fate, to die without their leader, their rebellion crushed without mercy. The amount of grief Angron felt is impossible to put into words. Everyone he had ever loved was down on the battlefield being slaughtered. There was nothing he could do to stop it, and worst of all, he knew that they were dying, thinking that he had abandoned them. Shortly after this, the Emperor would force him to lead his bastard sons. He was told to go out and conquer the galaxy in the Emperor's name. Someone that, from his perspective, was no better than the slave masters of Nuceria. All the while, having a bunch of crazy archaic nails jammed into his brain that forced him to feel nothing but rage and anger at all times. Breathing, walking, thinking, eating, drinking, literally everything caused him to endure tremendous amounts of pain. A pain so great it would send any normal man into shock within minutes. The only thing that loosened its grip was wanton bloodshed and murder. Like I said before, Angron's circumstances are definitely tragic, but what he did to his sons was horrific and unforgivable. Now, it's obvious why Angron despised his sons, the Emperor, and the position that he found himself in, but he took a sick and twisted form of pleasure in, for lack of better words, torturing his legion. He would force time limits for the conquering of a world, telling his Marines that they had 24 hours to completely take the entire planet, something that for even an Astartes is unheard of. After the 24 hours were up, regardless of where they currently were or what state the planet was in, the World Eaters would be forced to return to their ships to face Angron's wrath. This would lead to mass confusion across the battlefield, as the Space Marines of the Legion would make increasingly rash decisions in order to meet Angron's demands, leading to incredible losses and the needless deaths of hundreds, if not thousands, of their brothers over time. On the world of Gehenna, one such time limit was put in place. The Gehennans that the World Eaters were fighting were an incredibly strange enemy, thousands of humans that came at them in waves with their arms spread wide and big smiles on their face. They wielded no weapons and kept marching forward, even as the bolter rounds exploded through them and into the Gehennans behind the original target, detonating and sending limbs spiraling through the air. The smiles on their face never wavered, and they just kept coming, the bodies stacking so high that they would end up crushing the World Eaters under their weight. They were unable to take the world within the time limit, and thus retreated in shame. They knew what was coming, and they told each other that they would return to their fate as brothers. Aboard the ship in orbit, Angron was almost amused by what had happened. His sons, these worthless weaklings, had been beaten by an army that wielded no weapons. It was absolutely remarkable to him. Their incompetence and ability to fail in ever more spectacular ways never ceased to amaze him. Decimation, Angron declared. Once more, the losses of the World Eaters would be compounded on to appease Angron's insanity. Decimation meant that 1 in 10 Marines who had participated in the fight before would be forced to bare their throats and die as punishment for the Legion's failure. Angron dismissively told the captains to draw straws or choose individuals to make examples of. Whatever. He didn't really care how they did it, just that they offered up 1/10 of their warriors for death. To the absolute astonishment of all the World Eaters who were present, Mago, captain of the 18th Company, stood up to his Primarch and told him no. "Unquadrini," said the 18th captain. "It took more than one Nucerian day to achieve conquest, and by your command, we killed ourselves. And we did it again at Brujo, and Halu, and Tricaton, and Cestus IV. Our blades are soaked in the blood of our brothers, our own kin, for no reason other than to slake your wrath. Spilled." Angron lowered his brutish face until it was level with Mago's. "Because you failed." "We did not fail," Mago roared. He knew all too well the ways of his father. He knew that he could measure the remainder of his life in moments, but he no longer cared about what would happen to him. He would have his say in front of all of his brothers before Angron tore him apart. "We went back every time after killing our own kin in shame, and we conquered those worlds. We won those wars. The flag of the Imperium was raised over their cities, and their people are now subjects because of our toil and because of our blood." Mago looked his father in the eye. And here we stand now, given the order that those of our brothers who have fallen with honor today must be joined by ones who fall in disgrace. No, he shook his head. No more. Angron towered up to his full height and looked like he was absolutely about to lose it when a volunteer stepped forward. He told the captain not to take from the front lines, as they had earned their valor. He dropped to his knees and bared his neck, and tells him, "For the Legion." Mago looks horrified, but seeing as he has no other choice, he brandishes his knife and whispers back to his brother, "For the Legion." "No, put your knife away," said Angron. Both men looked incredibly confused, but in a mocking twist of pure contempt and hatred for his sons, he told them that he wanted to see him do it with his bare hands. This wasn't just punishment anymore, this was cruelty. Magos throws the knife to the deck and tells him no. Angron, through snarling teeth and bloody spittle, asks if he's being refused. Magos once again tells him that he's not going to do this, and Angron flew into a frothing rage. His wrath was so intense that even all of the other legionaries in the room, who had fear practically genetically spliced out of them, instinctively reached for their weapons. A single warrior stepped forward to try to placate him. Angron responded by ripping his arms off and throwing them across the room. In less than a heartbeat, Angron had lifted his axe Widowmaker into the air and charged into his sons. If it had not been for the combined efforts of the World Eater librarians, the damage that Angron could have done would have far surpassed the 1 in 10 decimation that he had demanded. They were able to combine their massive psychic powers into a single force to combat against Angron's rampage. His wrath was too much to be simply overpowered, as he fought ferociously against their attempts to pacify him. Eventually, they were able to knock him out by tricking his mind into reliving a memory from his childhood, the moment he had been abducted and forced into slavery. Back then, his attackers had struck him in the back of the head, knocking him unconscious, and when his body experienced the memory again, it reacted in the same manner. The act required an enormous amount of psychic energy, and when it was done, a third of the librarians lay dead. After this event, Angron was brought to the apothecarium aboard the ship. The librarians had done what they did in a panic and hadn't restrained themselves. The World Eaters weren't even exactly sure what happened to him, or whether or not he would wake back up. Now, it was around the same time that a World Eater's apothecary named Garland had been experimenting with the Butcher's nails. Originally, he tried to cure Angron of them, but after he failed with that, his new goal was to replicate them, so they could be implemented across the Legion. In one of his earliest tests, he attached them to one of the World Eater's librarians. And the results were not great. The psychic storm being brought about by the combination of the archaic Butcher's nails and the intricate mind of a psyker resulted in a hole the size of a Warhound Titan in the side of their ship. The nails were seen as incredibly dangerous, and the experiments were still in their infancy. But regardless of this, Garland was determined to deliver results to his Primarch. After Angron's rampage subsided, the Legion was licking their wounds. They began to question who would lead while the Primarch was incapacitated, and those decisions were being decided in the dueling pits. Mago is against the idea of the Butcher's nails being implemented across the Legion, and he finds himself in a conversation with his first axe, Orontis, an individual that has been one of the loudest outspoken proponents of the nails implementation. After what they had just witnessed, Mago asks him if he still wants the 12th to take the nails. Orontis tells him, of course, that his opinion hadn't changed. Mago tells him that the ordered decimations by the Primarch and the shame of defeat after defeat was tearing the Legion apart. Grief and shame were pushing their brothers down a path they didn't understand, and may lead them to doing something that there was no coming back from. Orontis argues that in the previous battle, if they had had the nails, they wouldn't have faltered. They wouldn't have fallen back to regroup. They would have just kept going, much like how Angron fought. He tells him that honor and nobility, these things that have always been so deeply important to the 12th, are becoming like a sheath around their blades. The nails are the way of the future. Mago understands that under Angron's leadership, the Legion was going to change, but he swore he would cling to the old ways, the ways of the Warhounds, for as long as possible. Orontis tells him that history never remembers those who hold too tightly to the past, only those who move forward. Mago is still working through his feelings about the future, but he can't help but shake a creeping feeling of dread, growing stronger and stronger with each passing day. Later, Mago and Kharne end up sparring in the dueling pits, and during their battle, they have a conversation that really sets apart the difference in philosophy over the nails. Kharne argues that every day the apothecaries are getting closer and closer to coming up with a suitable replication of the device, that their implementation is an inevitability. Mago says that this might not come to pass, as the experiments are proving to be incredibly dangerous, and in addition, he cannot fathom that the Legion will accept them, seeing what they have done to the Primarch's mind. Kharne informs him that not all others view the nails the way he does. Despite the Primarch's mental state, he fights like no other. He was a rock, unbeatable, fury and wrath made manifest. To deny his strength was an impossibility. The other world leaders saw that strength and wanted to harness it for themselves. He tells Mago to not forget that at the end of the day, he is a weapon, and that many of the world leaders don't see much further than the blades in their hands. If this is something that will make them stronger, something that will make them closer to the Primarch, then they will do it without hesitation. Mago says, but at what cost? I've seen this strength and how it has turned every battle he has ever been involved in. That's undeniable. But I've also seen what happens before fighting begins, and its aftermath. The crazed months in between fights, the screaming that comes from his inner chamber, the hordes of crewmen that go missing whenever he walks the decks. I won't deny the reality that an entire legion with the nails would be one of the most unstoppable fighting forces in the entire galaxy. Those are facts, but we would no longer be warriors. We would be slaves, our minds chained to the nails. We would no longer be being deployed into battle. We would be loosed into it. Kharne asks him if their purpose will change if they take the nails. They stand apart from the other legions as it is. They're not soldiers like their cousins. They are conquerors. He asks Mago to consider the planet they had been fighting on before. He says that it's not just a world that needed to be brought back into compliance. It was a forest of fetid and rotten growth that was covering the entire world and choking it of new life. In order for this forest to grow once more, it needed to be burned to ash, as ash was one of the most potent soils that existed. The world leaders were the firestorm. They existed to burn a world to the ground. So like a phoenix, it could arise once more to its true potential. The nails were not going to change that, nor every Astartes' destiny to die in battle. Mago concedes this point, but he says that the other legions will hate them and fear them for this. Kharne simply shakes his head and tells him that it's not their concern, that there was purity and nobility in what they did, the things the other legions couldn't or wouldn't do, that they had never left any alive and they never would. Mago tells him that there's no nobility in being a monster, and Kharne laughs. He tells him that his problem is that he still thinks he is human. Angron was their Primarch. His blood flowed through their veins, and he was their destiny. Mago counters, telling him that Angron was broken, a madman, and that Kharne would see the world leaders follow in his path. That the weapons they wield, the ships that bear them across the stars, the armor that they wore, none of those things were theirs. All of those things would be passed to the next generation of Marines. Did nothing belong to them, not even their choice and their destiny. Kharne shakes his head and tells him that he's speaking as if they ever had a choice at all. With Angron still incapacitated, and the inevitability that the Legion's apothecaries would finally be able to replicate the nails getting closer and closer, Mago knew what he had to do. He left the void ship he was stationed on and journeyed to another in the World Eater's fleet, a ship known as the Conqueror. There he walked for hours, deeper and deeper into the vessel's heart. He eventually reached his destination, the Hall of Legends, where the Legion's heroes were laid to rest. The servitors stationed there validated the Centurion's identity and permitted him entrance, and once inside, he instructed the tech adepts to conduct the Ritual of Awakening on one of the dreadnoughts. After the ritual was complete, he ordered them to leave. What he had to say was for the Contemptor's ears alone. Nagra Kali, the previous captain of the Unbroken, stood before him, an iron god of war. He asked Mago why he had woken him up, and so Mago tells him of everything that had transpired since he had been asleep, and subsequently, what he felt needed to be done to save the 12th. After the Dreadnought hears everything that he has to say, he warns him that they would be the first Legion to openly turn against their Primarch. He reminds him that once before, the Emperor had purged a Primarch, as well as every Astartes under their control, and not to think for a moment that the World Eaters were exempt from such scrutiny. Such an act of betrayal would create oceans of blood. Mago ruminates on the Dreadnought's wisdom, and asks him if maybe Kharne is right. Would things be simpler with the nails? All this doubt, all this uncertainty, would the nails take it away? The Dreadnought thinks for a moment and tells him that they just might. But if they did, what would be there to replace it? Nagra Kali tells him that he's going to stay awake for a little bit longer. He hasn't necessarily pledged himself to either side, but he wants to witness how this will all unfold. He tells Mago to go to his other brothers and find where their heart stands on the matter, that if he plans on going through with this, he's going to need allies. One by one, the world leaders that share Mago's views come aboard a ship known as the Hound's Tooth, Legion centurions, captains, and subcommanders from nearly a third of the World Eater's companies. They came in secret to swear their loyalties and uphold their duty of protecting their legion, even if the threat was coming from within their own ranks. These were brothers that he knew he could trust, Terran-born warhounds that had not been seduced by the power of the nails. They had been made aware that the apothecary had nearly completed a working prototype, and that he was going to be resuming his tests soon. The group is admittedly quite disturbed by this revelation, and immediately begins discussing what to do. One captain claims that they need to storm the ship that Angron is incapacitated on, kill every Marine aboard, disable it, and launch it into the void. Another spits back that the Emperor had created Angron, that they were meant to follow in his path. Who was he to decide that he knew better than the Emperor? Another suggests killing the apothecary before he can finish the replica. Mago reminds his brothers that they had all borne witness to the path that Angron was on, and what the nails had done to him. That the Primarch's madness could not be allowed to infect the Legion. The decimations, the killing of their own, the countdowns, it all had to end. That if anyone is capable of healing their Primarch, it would be the Emperor. That Angron needed to stand before him, and if he was not willing to go to Terra of his own accord, then his loyal sons would have to drag him there in chains. One member scoffs at this, saying that he is speaking of insurrection. Even if they were successful, even if they somehow managed to overthrow their Primarch and take back their Legion, what then? He asks him, do you think the Emperor will just allow this to happen? That he will let us march into the Golden Palace with our Primarch in chains? Do you believe that he would take no action against the 12th? Another one of the captains chimes in saying that the Emperor would have to understand. He knew Angron better than anyone. He had to see that they had no choice. Another says even if the Emperor does understand, even if he sees our actions as justified, a Legion cannot be allowed to turn against their Primarch. Mago steps in saying that he would accept the Emperor's judgment, whatever it would be, that he would willingly go into oblivion, loyal, convinced of the rightness of his actions, and above all else, sane. He tells his brothers that what they do here today, they do for the Legion, that Garland and his creation, and all the knowledge of it must be destroyed, never to be learned again, that they must do this with as little blood as possible, for the blood of their kin had been forced to stain their hands for too long. Those who would stand against us are blinded by the Nail's promises. They are blinded by Angron's power, but they are still our brothers. After the meeting, a legionnaire named Hano is sent to destroy the Butcher's Nails prototypes. When he arrives at the Apothecarium, he disables the power generators and assassinates several of the tech priests that are standing by watching over it. Before he can retrieve the prototype, he's suddenly struck by a dart in the back of the neck. Garland was there waiting for him, and he tells him, what did you think you were going to do? Just slip in here and destroy all my work? That the Primarch suddenly would change his mind? Even if you killed me, this would be inevitable. Survival instincts, hesitation, doubt, all of these things hold us back. We are about to be made pure. You and your kind are ignorant, like a dull knife that resists sharpening. Shortly after this event, Garland invites all of the other world leaders aboard the ship to come and witness his miracle. Hearing this, Mago and the other commanders realized that Hano had failed, and at this point was most likely dead. The gathered world leaders digested the enormity of the apothecary's achievement. What for so long had merely been a dream, a promise that threatened to never be fulfilled, was now realized, and the 12th Legion would never be the same. The only thing that was left to do now was for someone to volunteer to be first. Mago and the other captains close their hands around their weapons, but before they can act, Kharne steps forward. He tells Garland that he is ready to give him the nails. Garland prepares him for surgery, shaving his skull and swabbing the area before going to work, hammering the nails into Kharne's brain. Kharne can feel them ticking, his rage building with every swing of the apothecary's hammer. Kharne's nerves were burning, his blood was turning to poison. He felt control ebb from his limbs, but they were not going numb or slack. New strength was coursing into them, filling them to bursting, the veins rising and bulging under his musculature like swollen tributaries. The restraints broke in a string of snapping metal links. Kharne heard the rushed voices around him as they backed away, sounding so thin, so weak, spurring his rage even higher as he tore the collar loose and surged up from the pit to face them. A cry ripped from Kharne's throat, a bestial noise beyond that of what a transhuman should be even capable of, as awareness snapped back into Kharne, like a fever slackening but not fully leaving him. A heavy, metallic musk filled his nostrils, as familiar to him as it was unmistakable. His head twisted and jerked from side to side as he took in his surroundings with wide, bulging eyes, seeing what the apothecarian had become. Abattoir was too cold of a word to describe it, too poetic, A butcher used tools to cleanly carve meat, according to the rhyme and reason of his trade. There was no rhyme or reason present here, and the rending had been done by hand. Bodies were slumped haphazardly around him, their limbs ripped free and hurled aside, their flesh pulled apart to expose the glistening gore within. Their blood poured over the deck, plating and splashed against the walls. Even the chamber itself was red, stained crimson from the lumen strips coated in arterial spray. Kharne is not alone in the room, and he notices that Angron is standing there in his presence, apparently having awoken from his trance. He asks Kharne if he sees now, and Kharne tells him that he does. This was the first time that Kharne would experience what it's like to lose himself to the nails, but it wouldn't be the last. It's in this moment that Kharne sees something he has never seen before, a look in the Primarch's eyes, an ugly approximation of approval, perhaps even pride. Angron then ordered Garland to implement them into as many warriors as he could. Garland tells him that the only real hurdle was creating the device itself. Now that he had it, he could implement them into 1,000 warriors within a couple of hours. The call goes out, and the rebels need to move fast. They are losing more and more potential allies every second. Angron and the warriors who had taken the nails were beginning to assemble on the embarkation deck. They were planning to descend back down to the planet's surface to finish their crusade. Now, the population of Gehenna was almost entirely artificial, legions of vat-grown humans being controlled remotely by a handful of individuals. Garland had only been successful in his experiments by studying the bodies of the slain Gehennans and reverse engineering the devices that had been implemented by their masters into their brains. The secret to the nail's construction was on the planet's surface. If the rebels could get a hold of that secret before Angron burned everything to ash, then they may just still have a way of saving him and their legion. Mago and the captains that are loyal to him make their way to the planet's surface. They follow the trail of destruction left by their brothers. They come across a world eater, blood still dripping from the wounds in the back of his head. He's crouched over a pile of corpses and seems to be eating them. Mago asks him if he's insane, and the world eater responds by lunging for his throat. There's a blinding flash, and the world eater's head is gone. They were not their brothers anymore. Mago tells his men to remember that what they do here today was for the Legion. When they finally catch up to Angron, Mago yells at him, "My Primarch, in the name of the 12th Legion and the Emperor of Mankind, I demand that you submit yourself to our custody and travel with us back to Terra to stand judgment for the crime of the Butcher's Nails." Angron laughed. "Crime," he spat onto the ground. "You sow a rebellion and accuse me of crime. Savor the taste of the air, Centurion. On the last night of your life, before I rip you limb from limb." Astartes on both sides threw themselves into one another, chain axes roaring to life, one side attempting to drag the Legion kicking and screaming into the future, while the other was desperate to keep it cemented in an all but forgotten past. It was here that Kharne and Mago met each other once again. Both combatants were incredibly skilled warriors, but only one of them had the Butcher's Nails. Mago wasn't fighting his brother. The brother that he knew was dead, and the creature that had replaced him fought unlike anything he had ever seen. His brothers fell all around him, no match for the nails. They were too much. The axe flew from his hands, blows split his flesh and clubbed him to the ground. He raised his head, looking out through blood-stained eyes. He watched his kin butcher one another, their cherished brotherhood devolving into frothing madness. Mago tried to push himself up, but crashed back to the ground. He strained to stare up at Kharne, no longer seeing the brother he had sworn to give his life for. Only a butcher. "This road will kill us all," Mago wheezed. "Everything we are, the brotherhood, the nobility, all of it will be erased. History will never know what we once were, only what you would have us become. A horde of marauding berserkers, driven by nothing save the impulse to spill blood. Reavers and murderers, not warriors. How long do you think you can live as monsters before you force the Emperor to act? How long before the Eaters of Worlds join the others, the forgotten and the condemned?" Kharne said nothing, only snuffing breath through bleeding lips. Mago felt strong hands haul him roughly to his knees. He looked up through the eye that could still see and saw the face of Orontes glaring down at him. His skull, riven with the accursed implants that would destroy the Legion. The eyes of his first axe, his champion of 1,000 battles, his friend, were gone, replaced by bulging, reddened orbs that saw nothing but blood. "You will fail," hissed Mago through clenched teeth. "Only ruin will follow you, and history will vindicate me." Kharne looked down, his eyes never leaving Mago as he raised his axe. "No, brother, it won't, because you will not be there to write it." In a scream of blurring teeth, the axe fell. Angron picked up Mago's severed head and throws it at the remaining rebels' feet. He asked them if he still speaks for them. They had tried to stand against their Primarch, and had failed. They all lowered their heads and dropped to one knee before him. The rebels that died there would remain in the dirt, their armor stripped of its insignias and their gene seed left to rot. One by one, each of those that stood against Angron would eventually pay the price. It took 8 days to implant the Butcher's nails into the rest of the Legion. 8 days of an unceasing procession of World Eaters submitting to be recast in Angron's image. 8 days to decide the future of the 12th Legion and the path that they would follow. By the end of the 8th day, every World Eater had been given the nails, save the few remaining blue-armored librarians. The future of the World Eaters was now undisputed. The path of the 12th would be that of the Butcher's nails and nothing else. All remnants of the Warhounds had been burned away, and from their ashes had arisen madmen who sought carnage above all else. Slaughter simply for the sake of slaughter. And for the first time since he had been stolen from New Syria, Angron felt proud of his sons.